Well, I try to start promptly because I know everybody has a busy day. So first I'll thank you for coming out. I know time is limited. We had tried to spread these meetings out, dates during the day, during nights. Everybody has different opinions about where they should be scheduled. I think this is the only one in a police station. Some people had concerns about that, but I've tried to fit everybody's needs and kind of a broad spectrum of meetings. A couple house cleaning items. First of all, my name's Jeff, Captain Jeff Jordan. I work in the chief's office. I handle legislative affairs and special projects. Some people may know me from Mid-City. I worked here as an officer, a sergeant, a lieutenant, and then now I work up in the chief's office. But that being said, a couple house cleaning items. This is my 5th presentation. So I've done 4 previously. And I've done them in different ways to try to kind of accommodate the needs of everybody in attendance. I'm going to do things a little bit differently today because some of the meetings have worked well, some of the meetings have worked not. I will say that in the past, I've tried to allow at every single slide comments for every single slide. It didn't work, and it's not working because everybody's jumping in, everybody's yelling, everybody's winning. So I would ask this. I will stick here for as long as possible to answer every question. I'll go back to any slide that you want brought back up. I will literally, work to endeavor, and I'll be honest, there may be a question I don't know, and if I don't know, I'm one of those people that I will find out an answer. We'll develop an FAQ page, we'll throw it on the website, and we'll seek to get your answers. I know a lot about this technology, but I also know in 30 years of doing this, I don't know the answer to every single question, and I probably never will. So let's just be honest about that. There's a dynamic nature of technology and law, and one of the best parts about it, keeps most people interested in this area like me, is that it's changing all the time. So with that being said, please indulge me as I get through this. And I ask this, we're all adults here, be respectful to one another. I will tell you at the different meetings, people's opinions of technology vary. Some people very supportive, some people not as supportive. And I want to give space for everybody to voice their opinions, but I would ask that we do that in a manner that we don't have people yelling at one another like we've had at other meetings, and we don't have people particularly yelling at me. I have a wife of 25 years, who does that very well, but no. But that being said, good space. I anticipate robust conversation. I welcome the robust conversation, but a respectful dialogue would be appreciated. That being said, can we go? So, I know you probably have seen these in restaurants. That's where I learned to love QR codes. But that being said, if you take a picture, snapshot it, internet, you can see our entire presentation. Everything that we're going to talk about today is online. We tried to provide as much information online as possible to answer your questions. And we're actually, as the meetings have evolved, as more questions have come up, we've tried to provide additional information and put it on our website. And I imagine this may be the same. So before we begin, next slide real quick. This whole process and everything here is really about the surveillance ordinance process, gaining information. There's certain requirements underneath it. Part of what was approved by City Council last summer, actually was approved August 10th, became effective September 10th, 30 days after an ordinance is voted on, it becomes effective. So really what was effective September 10th was the implementation of a surveillance ordinance, and we'll get into describe that ordinance and what the requirements of it are. But be that as it may, some of the items that you'll find on our website, the ordinance has 2 main requirements. It requires for every technology that we have is a use policy. So we have to have a use policy for each technology. In addition to that, we have to have meetings like this per the ordinance to elicit feedback and comments. And part of those comments will get developed into what's known as a community impact report. The authors and the people who envisioned this ordinance believe that we should have a use policy, a community impact report, and then they would be presented in tandem to what is now known as a privacy advisory board. So what we're looking at here in this meeting is information collected, comments, your thoughts, and I will sit here and have everybody speak and just document those thoughts because I want to combine that and give a picture to the Privacy Advisory Board of what people's thoughts are in relation to this technology. People ask me what's going to happen at the Privacy Advisory Board hearing. I wish I could tell you it's the first one. It's the inaugural Privacy Advisory Board meeting. It's scheduled for March 15th. We're going to go on March 15th, and we're going to go to the first Privacy Advisory Board meeting. And I've been to a lot of different advisory boards through the years, police oversight, commission on police practices, or community oversight board on police practices. A lot of the boards and commissions, obviously, they're looking to hear information and make decisions to that. The Privacy Advisory Board is tasked with listening to this information, saying, hey, we think this is a good idea, or reject it, it's a bad idea, and make that recommendation to City Council. Now, Privacy Advisory Board, Privacy Advisory Board is a recommendation body. They don't vote per se. They don't have legislative authority. They don't approve contracts. They can't usurp the legislative power given to our City Council. City Council has legislative authority to approve budgets, make decisions on ordinances. Boards and commissions are typically tasked with making recommendations for council to consider. So they're a recommendation body. So with that being said, I'm going to go back, and I am the deliverer of news. Let's just put it that way. My job is to inform you about the history of this technology, answer questions related to it to the best of my ability, and then work through this and tell you what we're proposing, why we're proposing it, and get into those details. That being said, smart streetlights. It's been a topic of conversation since probably at least 2018. In the media, out of the media, reported on it accurately in some cases and very inaccurately in others, okay? I have seen reporting all over the place, and I don't want to disparage any one reporter, but I will tell you in many cases some of the reporting is wholly inaccurate. That being said, as we work through this, what is accurate and what is factual is on December 2016, City Council approved a contract with General Electric on what's colloquially known as smart streetlights. Smart streetlights actually have two components in the contract. The first was for LED lighting. LED lighting is the end of that light pole. You see the kind of coming off there, the actual light. It's got a little bulbous top there a little bit, you know. That's actually an LED light. LED lighting is significantly better in our communities. It's brighter. It allows people to see much better than old lighting. The much bigger heads that you see there are kind of high pressure sodium. They're outdated. They're being replaced around the city with LED lighting. We're trying to move to that. Lighting does have a direct impact on crime. People feel safer under lighting. So that is one component of it. The second component of it is a little box with the antennas coming off there. That is a smart streetlight sensor. And that's what the old ones look like right there. Within that smart streetlight sensor, there's actually three sensors. There's an optical sensor, camera. There is an acoustic sensor, which is configured to measure, high frequency, i.e. gunshot detection. And then the last sensors on there are environmental sensors. Environmental sensors are like humidity, temperature, those kinds of things. Collectively, the idea for city government when they rolled this out was city planning and public use. Could you collect data to develop better infrastructure, roadways, pathways, bike lanes, all that fun stuff? All of that, and if you ever want to see they're still on YouTube on it. There's a great video the city rolled out where I actually learned a lot about this stuff, not from the city themselves, but from YouTube, watching what the city was proposing, because they posted it on YouTube. Unfortunately, while they posted it on YouTube, many community members were not communicated with that information, and also left out of that particular information was the San Diego Police Department. We were not involved in any of the decision making related to this. We were not told where these were going to be deployed. We found out about this in August of 2018 as far as full capabilities. And I'll tell you how we found out about it. In August of 2018, we had a homicide in the gas lamp. It was in the evening at bar break. And if anybody's ever been down to the gas lamp at bar break at 2 o'clock in the morning or so, it is hectic to say the least. A lot of people out there, maybe a little bit of alcohol served, in some cases too much alcohol, but in any case, a fight between two parties. Those two parties, very physical altercation. It led to one being shot to death and the other one fleeing the scene in a car. Officers arrived on scene, got a description of the car, were able to pull the person over. So they pulled the person over. At their feet was the gun that they had used to just kill somebody. They took him into custody. They subsequently charged him with murder, booked him into jail. Some very, very smart officers were on scene, looked up under the crime scene, and what's that? They were like, okay. We found out that that right there to the officers was a smart street light. cameras, sensors, all of that stuff. We did not have access to it. We had to go to the city and say, how do we get access to that? Because at that time, we had no access to it. No direct way to contact it, no direct way to see the data from it. So we worked with the city to get access to it and take a look at the video that was contained within. The video, and I watched the video, it was jaw-dropping to say the least as far as watching a murder on TV. It provided great details about what actually happened. And during what happened was a fight between two persons. One person during the course of that fight decided to pick up those wooden signs. Sometimes you see there's no parking, there's a sign, but there's wooden poles to it. Began to beat the other one about the head, knocking him down, significant beating. Subsequently, he pulled out a firearm and shot the person to death. So what did we have there? We had something that obviously changed the narrative quite frequently. We hear, hey, I did it in self-defense. Well, this was, I did it in self-defense. Oh, and by the way, now we have video that he did it in self-defense. So when people talk about use studies, for us, that use study was, well, we now have exculpatory evidence to show his innocence, that he used that in self-defense. And I will tell you, for us, pretty incredible as far as this. When you typically take interviews from drunken people at the gas lamp at 2 o'clock in the morning, their stories can be somewhat conflicted at times. There were some people who said he never had a right to shoot him. Others were saying he was completely within his right. I will tell you that I watched the video and it was a self-defense matter. Now, that's great. It was really interesting. That saved that person being charged with murder. The problem that arose from that is we now had, the city had budgeted 4,200 of those things to be put out citywide. They had 3,200 deployed before we saw this the first time. And just so you know, the exact number that was initially deployed is 3,200. They bought 4,200, they deployed 3,200. And I've seen, and just so you know, for money reasons and money aspects of this, I've heard this reported as a $30 million project. Of that $30 million, $19 million was spent on this entire project, $11 million was not spent. $11 million was actually budgeted for the sensors, not the LED lights. So I see that a lot in the paper. It's just referred to as, there was a loan taken out for 30 million, 19 spent, 11 on sensors, 8 on the other items in different systems. So from the police department standpoint, really powerful tool. And the first time we saw it, we looked at it, met with Chief David Nislight and said, this is a great tool. Didn't know about it, and it raises all kinds of concerns. Those kinds of concerns from the get-go for us was, how do we utilize this? We have no policy and/or procedure, so we immediately developed one. Not necessarily reported was the fact that we developed our own internal policy and procedure. The city lagged afterwards, but we had a policy and procedure and began meeting with council members immediately thereafter. And we were with council members within 60 days on a policy and procedure, notifying them what we saw as the capabilities, and we went to everyone. It was reported that we didn't do any of that until almost a year later. That is inaccurate. I attended the meetings. I asked the reporter who wrote that to look at the council members' schedule, because it was not only on their schedule, the topic was on their schedule, which if you had docket. So that being said, what are the problems? Initially, data collection and ownership, big issues. Was it spelled out? We'll acknowledge all this. Data collection and ownership, limited program oversight, right? We have a police department policy and/or procedure, but you don't have a citywide one. You have a lack of transparency and community engagement. All agree on that. And obviously here today to talk about community engagement, because that's one of the things that arose out of this problem was the need for community engagement and transparency, along with what are the technical capabilities, use, and privacy rights associated with the technology. Everybody in this room, from the police on down, for me, and I was involved in this, back in 2018, everybody should acknowledge this was rolled out poorly, exceedingly poorly. Actually, if I was going to use Jersey vernacular, I would use other language, but but that being said, it was poorly done. But then these led to a suspension of the project 2 years after the fact. Suspended in September of 2020. So from August of 20, September of 20, Program existed for 2 years with police access before it was suspended by then Mayor Kevin Faulkner. And it was suspended, but here's what the city did. This technology is a hardware, which is the box. It's a software, the operating stuff in the box. But information, much like your phone, if you were to take a snapshot of your loved ones and you wanted to send it to a friend, well, there has to be wireless connectivity. So you have to transmit that information wirelessly from one source to another for viewing purposes. So when we talk about these components, hardware, software, wireless transmission of information. What the city did when they turned it off, they cut off the wireless connection so nobody could wirelessly access this. As I sit here today, I will tell you right now, I'm not sure of the 3200 what works, what doesn't work, what's still going on. It's cut off. I can't see it. But I will tell you, because people have asked, have there not been mandatory times where you were forced to take these down via a search warrant served upon the city to look for evidence of a homicide? And that's absolutely true. There's been articles written about that. Since these have been turned off and we no longer have access, the mayor has directed the police department not to access them. Mayor Gloria has directed the police department not to access them, right? All pending this surveillance ordinance. They said, you know what? Council's made its will be known. We're not going to access them until we go through the process of the surveillance ordinance and the privacy advisory board. It's fine. However, the district attorney's office is well aware that these things exist. They also assist in investigation, and about 15 times in the last 2 years or so, 2.5 years, they have issued search warrants on the San Diego Police Department, compelling us to physically take these down off the poles and provide them to them. When they're taken down off the pole, since they can't be wireless connected or wirelessly activated, they go to a regional forensic crime lab where their SIM card, much like your phone, is taken out, manually downloaded, because that's the only way that they can see if there's images of the crime that may have occurred underneath them. As we get to this, and I only say this out there because I'm trying to dispel all the rumors that I continue to hear on social media at one shot. What we do know is factual too. The uproar and the outrage, in my opinion, warranted across the board, led to mandatory community engagement, the establishment of a privacy advisory board, an ordinance that regulates the acquisition, use, funding, storage, sharing of information from surveillance technologies as defined by the ordinance. Talk about that for a minute. The federal and state government have been slow at best as far as adapting to the rise of technology. So you don't see a lot of federal and state oversight. You see some state oversight, but not a tremendous degree of federal oversight. I think we can all acknowledge there's a certain degree of dysfunction in the federal government at this time. That being said, there are state laws, but most states and local ordinances, San Diego now being among, I think, 25, they decided not to wait for additional oversight. They created the surveillance ordinance, about 25 other cities documenting this. And there are a number of other cities that have ordinances. None of them have anything like the city of San Diego. And I say that the ordinances in typically other cities will provide oversight for hardware. In some cases, they'll provide oversight for software. San Diego's is the hardware, the software, and the data emanating from both oversight. So in some communities, what you'll see is, Seattle's a great example. They have about 20 technologies that have oversight as their ordinance is written. We looked at, based on the language on how surveillance was defined in our ordinance, at 250 technologies within our department, seeing if it would meet the parameters of what surveillance is. From there, we went through it, looked at the strict definitions. We have about 90 to 95 technologies that we will have to report on. These are the first two that we're going to get to. Next slide. We knew that when we used smart streetlights, whether or not they provided the city with the benefits that they had hoped, clearly they did not, they did provide the San Diego Police Department with significant benefits. I will walk through the 400 cases that we used them on in 2 years. And for context, we get over 1 million radio calls a year to our dispatch center. We get dispatched to 500,000 calls a year. We used these on 400 calls during the course of 2 years. During that, they had great success for us. And as a result, our proposal was to bring them back. Come on in, everybody. Our proposal was to bring them back along with license plate readers. So a combination, video in public spaces and ALPR, license plate or automatic license plate recognition and or reading. So, again, I've covered this as far as access was disconnected in 2020, 3,200 lights were deployed. Next slide. Where are they placed? If you were to go to the internet right now and say, where are they placed, what decision making? I think I told you early on, the San Diego Police Department and the initial rollout did not pick the locations of where they were deployed. We had no control over it, no say in it. They were deployed where they were deployed. In this scenario, that is not the case. The San Diego Police Department has selected 500 places for new technology that we're proposing. There is a map there, but if you were to go online, you would see the map and you can blow it up, you can look at it, you can go all the way down to the very limit and say, boom, these 500 locations. And people ask, where were these 500 locations picked? Why? For the 500 locations for this, we looked at and started with our crime analysis unit. I wanted. Is it possible to make the font a little bit bigger? I don't know because it'll go outside the screen. Yeah. We would have to say that the website in and of itself would be the place to go to blow it up. And we have a link there. You can go on it. You can blow it up on the internet, take a look at it at home. And that being said, I looked at crime analysis and I asked crime analysis, I want to know in the city of San Diego, where is the most gun violence? Tell me, we have 125 beats in 350 square miles in the city of San Diego. Tell me where the most gun violence occurs. Also, I want to know where are most guns being retrieved from. If we're contacting folks and guns are being taken off them, break it down to me by neighborhoods, break it down to me by beats. Then I asked, commanding officers, captains, lieutenants, detectives in area stations. I went to the people who were investigating crimes throughout our city. I asked gangs, I asked homicide, I asked robbery detectives, child abuse, sex crimes. What's going on? What do I need to know about? And if you had input on 500 cameras and where they would be deployed, where do you think they would make the most difference as far as catching, crime and different occurrences of crime? I will tell you that we identified one park in our city that has 5 homicides within 18 months with no license plate readers, no cameras. Obviously, when we looked at that, to me, it was completely unacceptable. And I will tell you, as I did a site walk through there, residents came out of the apartment complex across the street were asking, what are you going to do to fix this? What are you going to do? They've had 5 shootings here, 5 homicides in this park over the course of the last 15 months or so. And those are the kinds of things that we did. We went out and we looked at the areas where it was happening at on the ground, talked to persons on the ground and said, okay, if we're looking at these spots, we're going to take the information, we're going to process that, and we're going to identify. And part of that is for a couple of different reasons. One, you want to have an immediate impact. 2, right? It's not just the immediate impact, it's like, what is driving that decision? So I can come into your room, it's like, we have to be able to do something that allows us to also to report back to you. Government is really bad at doing one thing in particular. It's bad at a lot of things, but one thing in particular it's really bad at. What government doesn't do with technology investments or a lot of other investments, very few times you ever say, we invested this money, what do we have to show for it? What's our ROI? That would be unacceptable in the business world. Not to have a return on investment, not for us. The ordinance itself requires us to go back annually and report out to City Council, we gave you this, how did you use it, what was the investment, what was the return on investment, what did you do? So with these 500 places, I looked at it to investigate these types of crimes. When we were active for those 2 years, we logged every single time we accessed it, 400 times. And where did we use it? 56 times to investigate homicides or attempted homicide, 55 times robbery, burglary. You can go through all these. Assault with a weapon, deadly weapon, felon, 53 times. We had captured a ton of fatal collisions. And I mean that traffic accidents at times where we did not know who was responsible. One of the most memorable collisions that we investigated was an incident where we had an elderly gentleman driving his wife home later in the evening. They had been married, I think, 50, 60 years. Through an intersection, a collision occurred. His wife was instantly killed during that collision. The other motorist guy in the car immediately blamed the elderly gentleman for running the stoplight, and he was responsible for his own wife's death. Needless to say, pretty traumatic incident for him. In that particular case, we went back and we looked in the video because we had a camera right there. Not only was he not responsible for his wife's death, the other person not only read the red light when it had been red for 5 seconds when he went through it at a high rate of speed, subsequently committing a vehicular homicide. Those are the kinds of things that I talk about. And I can go through any one of these, and there's a story for all of them. Some of them are this neighborhood. You know, we've investigated things in this neighborhood as well. We had a very high-profile homicide where we had a member of this community who was killed by her husband who fled the scene. He also fled the scene, throwing evidence out of his car as he fled the scene that was captured, that was subsequently used. All this documented. Each one of these. Now, I would ask, because I've been attacked for the uses of this technology in this manner. People have said these weren't warranted. What on this is not warranted? Do you want to talk about these? That's fine. I'm willing to talk about all of them. The one that comes to mind is felony vandalism, property crime. And people say, well, was that really necessary to investigate felony vandalism? I don't know. If you have a store downtown or in Barrio Logan or elsewhere, and somebody blows by your $10,000 windows out, can you replace those? Can you afford to replace those? Is your business going to continue to operate? And the person who was responsible went right on down the road and caused about $100,000 in damage. So we looked at those and said, this is series related. This person's going to continue to do that and continue to damage things. So we looked at that. Security threat. Somebody asked, well, what's a security threat? We had somebody who tried to actually break into our police station. We have a lot of different things in here, like equipment, firearms, and other things. We just happened to have a camera that captured that person afterwards who had tried to break into the police station. Officer-involved shooting. People say, do you hold yourselves accountable to this? Yeah, we do. One of the OIS has captured a deputy shooting somebody as they escaped from the San Diego County Jail. Pretty high-profile case. You may have heard about it. We used that when we saw that, and we prosecuted that deputy, and he was found guilty for shooting that person who was fleeing the jail. So not just for us. I say public safety, shared responsibility, mutual accountability. If people have input on that, I'd ask you either afterwards, come talk to me, make a comment online. I'm looking, because I'll be honest with you, if this comes back, I'd like clear direction. What does the community want, not want? Do they not want this? That's fine. We can have that conversation, document that. But if we do have it, what should we be using it for? What's on there that I should not have used it for? Next slide. People ask, is there any way you can ensure that my privacy is protected? Or how can you at least mitigate some areas of privacy? And what does privacy really mean? Privacy, and the courts have often said, one of the definitions is the right to be left alone. The right to a reasonable expectation of privacy. And how is that achieved? And where in this video do you think you have a reasonable expectation of privacy? That is a high school. That high school is behind a tree line. Those trees were planted there, I'm sure, along with that fence to keep people from having prying eyes on kids playing in that area. So how do you address that? And this is just one example. If you look at the bottom screen, can you see the high school any longer in the upper left-hand corner? You cannot, because it was digitally masked. And we do that on every single screen. When this was in effect, we looked at every single image. These are not pan, tilt, zoom. We don't move them around. They're fixed cameras looking at fixed locations. You have to look at every single screen and say, okay, did we capture something here where somebody would have a reasonable expectation of privacy? And if we did, we mask it out. And I have looked at probably hundreds of images like this from around the city while looking at various crimes, the 400 crimes, and have seen masking time and time again that if there was an area that looked over private property and they had a fence line and a lawn in the back, masked out, schools masked out, businesses masked out, we're looking at areas where people don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy. And you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy by case law, in public viewpoints, sidewalks, streets, those areas. Other places we have to look at, and we have to at least try to mitigate that. Now, this is just one thing that we can do to enhance the protection of privacy. The other thing too is people with video, they want to know, well, how long do you keep the video? The video is kept for 15 days. And 15 days was set because it gives us enough time if a violent crime is committed for us to investigate it, to determine if there's evidence. I will tell you that in some cases, we initially had it set at 5 days on the original program. It wasn't enough. Sometimes we got late notice of crimes where the evidence was already gone. And just so you know, whatever we set it at, once that deadline is passed, it's unrecoverable. We can't go back and get it. It's gone forever. That's the way it's set. So when that deadline is set, we can't go back and get it. And people ask, is there facial recognition with this technology? No. It's not designed and not programmed in just to have facial recognition. So no facial recognition on any of the technologies that we're proposing. Next slide. License plate readers are different than video in public places. License plate readers take a snapshot of a license plate. They collect the information on the license plate number. It'll tell us the make and model of the car. It'll tell us how often that it passed under the license plate reader and how many days, and it'll tell us the date and the time it passed. That's it. What doesn't it tell us? It doesn't tell us who the driver is. It doesn't tell us who the registered owner is. It doesn't tell us who the passengers are. In short, it doesn't give us any personal identifying information. It doesn't tell us. What it does do is, with that license plate in criminal activity, it provides real-time and investigative leads. It gives us the ability, if we know that particular car was involved in a crime, the detectives to go back. This morning, before I came over here, I was reviewing flyers from the night before. We had a flyer out of a white vehicle in Point Loma, SUV, that hit somebody, no license plate, but at least we know it was a white Ford Explorer that hit somebody, left the scene, causing significant injuries. With that alone, with license plate readers in that area, we could at least search for vehicles who may have hurt and significantly injured that person. At least give us a start of an investigation. Wouldn't know necessarily who the driver was yet, but at least a start to go into a completely separate database and begin to do that research. And let's talk about databases for a moment. No officer in this department can go into a database with PII, personal identifying information, without having their name, ID, password, along with documenting the reason why they're looking with an incident number or case number and why they're doing it. You have to have, to access these databases, a need to know and a right to know. That is like law enforcement 101. It's basically taught in the academy, and you're tested on it pretty much throughout your career. It's part of what we call the California Law Enforcement Telecommunication System. Sorry, it's been a long week. CLETS. And just so you know, in law enforcement, we don't do anything without having a cool acronym associated with it. So California Law Enforcement Telecommunications System. You have to have, if officers know nothing else, they know they have to have a need to know and a right to know and document it before they can access data. If you access data inappropriately, and we audit data, the Department of Justice audits data, not only do you suffer individual punishment, but there's a collective punishment for the department from the DOJ. Objective real-time leads, it provides details of license plate, it's indiscriminate evidence or non-discriminate evidence. Some people say, well, doesn't the license plate recognition, doesn't that technology, have any bias in it or anything else? It's a subject of debate, and I've had this conversation over the last few meetings. Typically, the technology of itself is just looking at the car, the plate, the make, model. That's it. That's what the thing does. But I will submit to the argument that because technology is touched by humans, at some point in time, is there bias potentially with where you place it, what you do with it, and should citizens be concerned? And that's what we're here to talk about. I will tell you, I'm sorry.
You stated that the camera is every 15 days?
Right.
Showing.
That's on data. So that's data, 30 days. Data is different than video, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Two different storage periods.
How is that different? I'm confused now.
Okay, well, I'll get to it in a minute. But like, answer that question, that's a good question. Video is different than that. This is a photograph. This is a still shot. Data in the license plate is 30 days. Video is 15 days. So two different technologies.
So there's a camera and a video?
Yes, there's video, and then there's a still shot camera. So data from the camera collects the license plate, which is held for 30 days. And the reason why 30 days, oftentimes data associated with this is used by detectives to look at series-related crimes. Right now, you may or may not know throughout the city of San Diego that we have a burglary series going on. Hitting homes where people come down, typically smash out the back patio of the window, go in, take valuables, and go from there. And where LPRs have been good has been looking at vehicles who consistently go into areas at the times and places when these burglaries are being committed and allow investigators to go back and take a look at those patterns and identify those particular vehicles. So data is different. We look at video as being more invasive than data as far as the video, and watch what's a shorter retention period of 15 days versus 30. But that being said, there's a lot of different benefits for us as far as using that data to identify suspects. In addition to that, data is run against databases. The databases that are used to run against is one, stolen vehicles. Stolen vehicles entered in a system. If the plate hits a trigger, that's a data system for a stolen vehicle, it triggers an alert. If, for example, an Amber Alert, ALPR picks up an Amber Alert, missing or kidnapped child, it can pick up that plate and send a signal to alert us that vehicle with a missing and or kidnapped child has been identified in this location at this time. Silver alerts. We get, in this community, a significant number of missing seniles. People who are older, people who lose, with different, unfortunately, diseases, Alzheimer's, dementia, go missing. We often enter them in silver alerts. On top of that, you have NCIC data systems, National Crime Index. It is not uncommon for homicide suspects from outside the area or inside the area be entered in the NCIC system. A little known fact about me, my first traffic stop was showing my field training officer that I knew how to run an MCT and a license plate on the computer in the car. In doing that, the very first plate I ever ran was somebody who was wanted in multiple states for homicide. Interestingly enough, my FTO asked me, what plate did I just run? And I said, that one. He goes, okay, can we back off that car a little bit and then we'll get some additional people to pull him over. And sure enough, the person, part of his part-time job besides homicide was transporting firearms up and down through various states and selling them. But that's the kind of alert that you get when you run a license plate. In the car, it'll signal the car, and this signal, it'll signal communications to notify an officer that a wanted vehicle for the various databases checking against, so officers can be dispatched to investigate that. Can we wait till the end or okay. So, next slide. I just told you how to detect crime as far as the various different hot lists and different things. CGIS compliant just means it's compliant with all criminal justice information systems. So there's a compliance in regards to that. And CGIS sets the standards for police departments, what we have to comply with when we develop these computer systems. So alerts, hot list alerts. Hot list alerts are typically used by, if we have robbery detectives and we know we have, say, somebody, a series, they're involved in taking over Home Depots, those kinds of things, and we get a plate, the detective with that information can manually enter it into the database to look for that vehicle, and if the vehicle is located, send a message to that detective that we've located that vehicle. That's a hot list detection. It sends an alert or a message to the detective saying it. It's a visual or audio alert that the detective gets saying, hey, we've located that vehicle. The evidence that typically comes from it, or we can search for, obviously date, time, vehicle characteristics, as I already mentioned, plate type, color, location. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, we have to make it unequivocal that the data is owned by the city and these technologies. I'm talking about the new contracts, whatever happened in the confusion in the last one, learn from our lessons. I'm the one writing the contracts, and I will tell you right now, it'll be specifically spelled out that we own all of the data, period. 30-day retention on ALPR data and deleted, 15 days for video. A lot of cities do not subscribe to that. Some of them retain data for much, much longer than that. I don't believe that's necessary. I don't believe in retention longer than 30 days. I have a lot of different issues with this. I've studied and read everything from the ACLU, EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation, and others. The longer you have on retention schedules, the greater chance there is for misuse and the greater trust issues that resolve in the community. So that's why it's set at 30 days and no more. Short retention periods and automatic deletion after 30 days if it's not used for evidence of a crime, automatically deleted and not recoverable. We believe that it removes bias as far as not looking at criteria as far as human beings. Not the color of one's skin, not their religious beliefs, not their sexuality or none of that. No gender. It looks at plates and run against database objectively. Now, data. Data is important. People worry about data breaches. People worry about data encryption. Data, most people ask about what does AWS mean? That's Amazon cloud, government cloud. It's basically a highly secure cloud where information is stored, but then stored with AES encryption, 256-bit, basically 256 characters to try to break. It's advanced encryption standards. Unfortunately, I've become more educated in this as time has gone on. But again, in regards to this, when we bring technology into the city of San Diego, it has to go through what's called IT governance. IT governance is very clear. Everything goes through the department. It goes through cybersecurity checks. It goes all the way through to make sure that the information is protected. And that's part of this whole process. What is ALPR not? Automatic license plate recognition or automatic license plate readers. It's not used for random searches. You have to have a reason to search it. Need to know, right to know. It's not predictive policing. It's not facial recognition. It's not PII. Doesn't identify the registered owner or the driver or the passengers. It's not used for traffic enforcement. People have asked me, why can't you use it for traffic enforcement? Why can't you issue tickets? What I have found from talking to community members and surveyed community members, once you get into traffic enforcement, people's, I guess we'll just say, approval of this begins to diminish. People may look at this and say, hey, we're fine with you looking for this for a missing child, maybe a missing senior, maybe a homicide or a robbery suspect with a gun. But once you start getting into traffic enforcement, absent a vehicular homicide, somebody who maybe lost a limb and a serious bodily injury, that's where you start to see surveys go down as far as their approval of it. Not collected to third-party databases, so it's not connected to the DMV, it's not connected to Carfax. So when I say not connected to the DMV, if it runs the plate, it doesn't tell us who the registered owner is. There's no third-party interaction. It requires a complete separate investigation where the officer has to go to a different database, enter their name, ID, right to know, need to know, and all the fields before they can access that information. This allows us to audit that information and hold people accountable for it. Next slide. I'm going to leave this up for a minute, and if you don't mind, I'm going to take a break from talking. These are a couple success stories. They're not our success stories because we haven't had license plate reader in a long time. At one time, we had mobile license plate readers. They were on cars. That program has discontinued a couple years ago. Part of the reason why it discontinued was we knew the ordinance was coming. A lot of the technology was old, and in many cases, we have let technology lapse pending the ordinance. We're looking to go back with our existing technologies and what's required, whether it's new or existing technologies currently within the department, we have to go back through this process. So rather than try to continue on with old equipment that was on cars, which typically we use to drive through parking lots and other areas to look for stolen vehicles, You know, I mean, obviously, you know, probably in the community, we have vehicles that are dumped because people often are just using them for transportation to get from point A to point B. So we often find them in malls or shopping complexes or in general areas that they dump them, steal another car. We would use mobile license plate readers to find those cars and reunite them with the owners. We don't have mobile license plate readers any longer. We don't have stationary license plate readers at this time. This is a completely new proposal. Next slide. Built into the policies you will see online, you will see a use policy. But beyond the use policy, which just answers the questions to the surveillance ordinance, that does not provide the level of information or expectations for officers on how they do and what we ask of them. So we tell them outright in our policies, which are posted online beyond the surveillance ordinance use policies, you'll see links to our policies on 1.51 and other policies related to license plate reader. Same thing for video. There's a baseline policy that answers the ordinance's questions, and then we drill down deeper and tell the officers under our department policies and procedures what we expect. And the first thing we expect is the ethical use of technology, followed by outlining and saying, what are the capabilities? Yes, these things run for 24 hours a day. They're collecting information. Gunshot detection software is not included in this deployment. We're not even talking about gunshot detection. And everybody says, well, these things have microphones. They're not being shipped with microphones enabled. So the microphones on these things being deployed, they will not be or not have the microphones working on them. So there's no chance that we're going to hear street level conversations. They're disabled at the factory level. If we want to install gunshot detection and do that later, that's a complete separate process coming back to this and starting this conversation all over again. For right now, we're looking at video in public places and license plate readers. Access. People ask me, when you had video in place, how many people had access to it? We have roughly, I think, 1,850 officers in the city of San Diego right now. People ask, is that a lot? Well, we're the second lowest police staff department in the United States for cities of 500,000 and above. Only the city of San Jose has less officers than us. We have, as of this morning, over 100 detectives down. So we're short 100 investigators. We are down roughly 10% of our workforce. So we're budgeted, I want to say for 2036 or so, we're right around 1,800 or so, 50, right around 200 or so less. And that fluctuates all the time. Our numbers went up. We just graduated an academy. We moved the needle a little bit. We just graduated 30 people who went out into the field last week or so, a couple weeks ago. But I say this because of all those officers, access is typically given to less than 100. Access is given, in my mind, to people who are most likely to need it for investigating violent crimes. That's homicide detectives, sex crime detectives, robbery detectives. I'll answer questions at the end. Child abuse detectives. Traffic investigators investigating fatal and serious collisions. By serious, I'm talking loss of limbs, those kinds of things. That's where we do it. Internal Affairs has access because they get to oversee all of us. And then my shop has access for people who work with me. So I am the program manager and I have to hold everybody accountable. That's my access. Next slide. Monitoring. Not actively monitoring video. We do not actively monitor. There's nobody sitting in front of a screen. There's nobody monitoring this video 24 hours a day. But if an alert goes off, we can look at the alert. We can see where the alert took place and dispatch officers because the system shows us where the nearest officer is. So we can look at the alert, we can find out who the nearest officer is, and we can move that officer to investigate that alert. So when do we look at video? We look at video, it's driven by many considerations. I showed you the cases where we used it, but I look at the immediacy of threats to public safety, information, and protection of resources, and potentially personnel. All these things drive looking at video. And I will tell you, one line in this I've gotten a question about. They're like, it says you can also look at video for protection of city resources. And yes, protection of city resources, we had 3 different fatal collisions involving city equipment to my knowledge when we had this in place. We had an officer who hit somebody and fatally killed them. We had a fire truck that was alleged to have killed somebody on duty. And I believe we had a trash truck or something along those lines. But what comes to mind is the police vehicle, because I looked at that video personally. In that particular instance, and it was just in the news, the case was just settled. You can look it up, about 2 weeks ago. We had video of somebody who literally jumped in front of a police car. The driver was not at fault, but he did some things that the courts looked at, or at least attorneys argued. You know, was he going 5 miles over the speed limit? Was he doing other things that contributed? Looking at it, he had 1 second to make a decision. It was dark out, person jumped in front of him. But even on that particular case, very limited liability on the department and or that officer. That said, if you don't know and work in different claims against the city, $250 million in claims against the city over the last 5 or 6 years. So if we have video that shows our officers or firefighters or workers didn't do anything wrong or had limited liability where they contributed to some elements of the significant injury and or death, that video can also be used to protect and guide us in our litigation claims when we get sued. Because personally, I would like not to pay out $250 million over 5 years in city claims for those kinds of accidents. Video transparency portal. Every one of those cases that I listed, with the exception of a couple, were released to the media when they asked. We had a log of every one of them that we used, why we used it, what crimes we used it on, where. There's 2 or 3 incidents that came to mind that we redacted and didn't release. One of them was a child in this neighborhood that was abducted from their home and assaulted. Not going to release a child being assaulted and an investigation related to it and whether we had video of it. Nor are we going to release sexual assaults and some of the nature of those things. We're going to protect the identities of that information. We're not going to release it. But the rest of the cases, the homicide, robberies, other things, we're going to document it. We're going to release it upon request of the media. That's called the California Public Records Act. Another fun part of my job is I get to be in charge of that as well. So I see all those requests and endeavor to make this information public. Transparency portal. We also plan on building a transparency portal so you can see how many vehicle plates were scanned, document basic information related to the ALPR, how many hits we had on it. People have asked, well, can you release my information or tell me how many times my plate was scanned? No, I'm not allowed to. California Supreme Court has ruled on that. I've talked about this at length. They said the Balancing Act, that information is exempted from release because the need for the community to know is outweighed by the need by the California Supreme Court to say that information is protected. So that information does not get released. So you can't ask us to tell you how many times your plate was scanned. That being said, we believe there's transparency to tell the cases what we're using it, much like the 400 cases I'm using it, as well as the ALPR data, how we're using it and how many hits. Next. Storage and retention. There are times where we download that video for like those 400 cases. When we download it, the detectives have it. They're required to operate under evidence collection standards. We have evidence collection standards, so if we have it, the detective's using it through their investigation, but when they're done with it, it's secured in our evidence vault. And if you've ever seen the evidence vault, it's got little well, I guess we can put stickers over it. If you've ever been drug tested, you have to seal your own sample or anything and initial it. Every time that seal is broken, it's a chain of custody, so we can go to court and say, this chain of custody identifies each and every person who's ever seen this. That's the level of that. And again, video footage 15 days, data 30 days. Release of video. There are many reasons why we have to release video. Probably one of the things that's been most, I think, interesting as far as the law changes is, and the challenging, I'm sure many of you have seen videos of officer-involved shootings and those kinds of things in the last couple of years. That's because SB 1421, Senate Bill 1421, and AB 748, Assembly Bill 748, I'll start with AB 748. It requires us in uses of force that result in death and or great bodily injury. If we have video or audio, we have to release that within 45 days. So you're seeing a lot of that information going out for the first time where originally it wasn't being released. 1421 has the same kind of requirements, but we are at least required to put typically you'll hear the dispatch, you'll see the video, you'll see the body-worn camera. In some of those videos, you actually have seen video from smart streetlights that captured those officer-involved shootings. That was also released as part of that package. And there's also legal issues, obviously the discovery process, where persons who are facing trial or criminal prosecution have access to the records. If we share information with the DA's office for law enforcement purposes, we have to document that and share and release the videos. And all that is also required for me to report out under the surveillance ordinance annually. I got to go back to, even after this process, every 12 months, I got to go back and report out how we use the technology, who we shared with, and that, which is going to be interesting because I think we collect something like 800,000 or 900,000 body-worn camera videos a year. So documenting all that and who they were shared with, I think is going to be quite the challenge, but we'll do it. That's what the law requires us to do in the city of San Diego. Next slide. People have asked me, sample cities with surveillance oversight and technology. These are just some sample cities that I pulled. They asked, does anybody else have ALPR? San Jose does, Oakland, San Fran, Davis, Vallejo, Seattle. You can add Nashville to that list now. I just found out they just started a 6-month pilot program with ALPR. Next, public cameras and video in public spaces. Seattle, Nashville, now you can add San Francisco. They just started a 15-month pilot program. And obviously, I think if you've seen San Francisco in the news, they have some unique circumstances going on in San Francisco where they've made the case that I guess video in public spaces is helpful to them. Next slide. We surveyed it. I don't want to walk through the whole survey. There's different areas where people felt very comfortable. You can look at those uses. There is a 31-page survey. We asked community members around the city, anonymously. A company called Zen City does the survey. We have a contract with Zen City to do the surveys. Just so you know, I've already got CPRA'd for everything related to Zen City, and we'll be releasing all that information out via CPRA. So we put that up publicly. But the survey's out. It's online. It's on our website. You can look at the 31-page website. I could spend over an hour or two just talking about the survey. In general, it said that people are more or less supportive of video in public spaces and ALPR, but that support begins to erode as you move away from violent crime and certain types of things and missing children, and you start getting down to infractions and other things. Next slide. Well, that's what the survey is. Next slide. You can go online and take a look at it. So I'll end with this. People have asked, again, what's the biggest issue? One of the biggest issues with data. Data will be exclusively owned by the city related to this smart streetlight technology. We knew it was a great tool for us for many cases. Of those 400 cases I talked about, 100, and I will tell you right now, 100 would not have been solved without the use of the video cameras. In one case, it was literally the perfect crime. We had a store owner in the gas lamp district who was sprawled out, face down in his store, and shot at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The person who did that with their accomplice left that store wearing masks, and the only mistake they made was taking those masks off directly underneath a smart street light and looked right up into it as he was taking off the mask and still holding it in their hand. The accomplice got into a vehicle, and we were able to identify the vehicle later on from a smart street light. That was it. No DNA, no forensics, nothing else. The DA who handled that case said this one and others that he had handled would not have been made without this technology. And I say this because, go back to those 400 cases. There was a story behind every one of those. There was a victim and a victim's family left at the result. To me, it's important technology, but that's my opinion. You all have opinions too. You can voice them at the end of this, document your concerns. I'll sit here and pass on all those concerns to City Council. And when I say City Council, just so you know, in interest of transparency, before I even started these community meetings, I went out to every council member's office. I spoke to council members, I talked to their staff, I told them exactly what I was presenting, what I was proposing. Every one of them knows before I started this community meetings what was in this proposal and information. So they, didn't indicate which way or another. They were told what it was. My personal belief is I'm not a big proponent of surprises. I passed that point in my life where surprise, I guess, just not for me anymore. That point, but they don't like surprises either. They want to know before we go out to community meetings what we're talking about, what the presentation is. They were shown this presentation before we came out here today. When combined with ALPR, Streetlights, we think it makes a powerful crime-fighting tool. But we recognize that technology, and let's acknowledge it, technology without trust has a lot of problems in the community. And I understand that. I'm not here to tell you that our rollout with the last project was anything less than, well, poor. Again, I'm going to stay away from my Jersey vernacular. It was poor. I'll tell you, ShotSpotter was terribly poorly rolled out in 2016. But you look at that, you learn from that, you come back and you say, this is what we're doing and why. I mentioned earlier Senate Bill 54, I think, or I did, and I said state law. But two of the state laws that are directly related to this, Senate Bill 54, Senate Bill 34. Let's talk about those for a minute because they're important. Senate Bill 54, the California Values Act, means that we don't get to share and are prohibited by law sharing information with the federal government involved in immigration services or immigration deportations and immigration enforcement. That's by law. So that being said, that's what the California Values Act is. Now, have there been agencies in this jurisdiction that have failed to follow that law? Oh yeah. There have been a couple, and they should be embarrassed about it because the law is pretty clear. But I can look at those agencies and say, I'm not going to make the same mistake. Each agency we share with, we make sure that they do not have an immigration nexus where they're in immigration enforcement. SB 34. SB 34 really gets into some other nitty-gritty. It provides a basic template for what organizations have to do. Have to have a privacy policy, have to have a use policy, which we've rolled it up into 1.51 in our department procedure. Lays out some of the requirements that we have, particularly as it relates to, God forbid, if there's a data breach, how would you handle that data breach? And it lays out, and I am fortunate to have my research analysis and planning unit here, who I said at the very first meeting when we talked about this, I want everything from SB 54 and 34 expressly outlined in our policies and procedures to document we are going to be in compliance with state law. And we are going to audit this. And we're going to hold people accountable. Because I do not want to be the agency that looks to be embarrassed in the paper for violating this law. Nor do I want to be the one, and it was brought up last night by you, sir, agencies that have been audited in the state of California who have failed to meet the basic parameters of these laws. I will not be that agency. But again, this is all proposed. Lessons have to be learned. Policies and procedures get modified as we learn those lessons and get feedback. Some of the biggest things, obviously we're looking at is how do we use it, placement of it. People have been concerned. And I will tell you, the placement of it, a couple things that really stood out to us were, we looked at it last time. Deployment really happened before we even had issues with abortion in this country. We had Roe v. Wade for God knows how many years, but now some states are out there saying, well, our laws are going to change based on the recent Supreme Court decisions. Not this state. Our state has decided to be that we're going to be the state that provides health care to people and health care decisions to people. That's what our state has said as far as being a sanctuary state. I can only say what the governor has said. In addition to that, we are guided by the federal law, and if you don't know what the FACE Act is, our officers are taught what the FACE Act is. That is free access to clinic entrances. So they have to, and they're required by law, and I've actually, as a sergeant in this division, has had to respond to areas where people have tried to block access to abortion clinics. And we've had to respond out, provide officers, and stand them at that post to make sure people were provided access to healthcare clinics. When looking at this, we're looking to avoid areas that are going to cause concerns to people. So as you look at that map, if you feel something is deployed next to an abortion clinic or a freedom of access, and that obviously causes you concern, I'm looking for that feedback. In the initial deployment, we heard overwhelmingly from our Muslim community that these were placed too closely to mosques and religious places. I've endeavored not to do that in this rollout and take a look at that. If I'm too close for some reason, and looking at this as to why we're not looking at mosques or other entrances or where people go to worship, I'm looking to avoid that issue, but also feedback. Did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? Do you feel it's too close? Provide the feedback. Nothing in this PowerPoint, including those locations that are chosen, are written in stone. Everything I have is in draft. Ultimately, this community will provide feedback. I have to do 9 community meetings per the ordinance. That's the minimum I have to do. Have I gone and done more than the minimum? Yes, I've gone to other meetings outside of this. If someone contacts me, like a woman last night said, I'd like to have you back to our community and have another meeting because we have some individual concerns, I will somehow figure out to work that into my schedule where I will go back and to the best of my ability, meet with additional folks. I'll figure it out. Timeline, again, March 15th to the Privacy Advisory Board after I wrap up community meetings this week. City Council, I'm not sure when. I have no idea when that date's been set. There should be an announcement that goes out either last night or today talking about time, place, location of the Privacy Advisory Board. That's not my shop. That's the mayor's office that does that stuff. I am the messenger of information. I don't make docketing decisions or location decisions as far as where board meets. Now, with that being said, that is the conclusion of my presentation.